Rain trickled down the windows of the small art studio where Mira spent most of her afternoons, lost in brushstrokes and color theory. Her sanctuary smelled of oils, canvas, and the faint sweetness of jasmine tea. She had just finished blending the last touches on a stormy ocean scene when her phone buzzed. Mira wiped her hands on an old rag and glanced at the screen. A message from Julian. Odd. Julian was her husband Aiden's older brother, charming in that practiced way that always made Mira uneasy. He rarely reached out to her unless it was about logistics or some strained family obligation. She opened the message. Hey Mira. Small gathering this Sunday at Stormvale. Be there at 3 p.m. Important. Surprise meeting, so don't tell Aiden. Just show up. Her brow furrowed. She reread the text. Stormvale? That was the Hawthorne family estate, imposing, cold, and unnervingly silent. She hadn't set foot there in nearly 8 months. Not since the last family brunch that turned into a 3-hour passive-aggressive inquisition about when she and Aiden would finally have children. She spun around on her stool and called her best friend, Kala. Within 2 rings, Kala answered. Guess who got summoned to the Batcave, Mira said, reading out the message. Kala whistled. And they don't want you to tell Aiden? That's shady. My thoughts exactly, Mira replied, her voice tight. He's usually the first person in the loop. He's their golden boy. Kala's tone shifted. Are you going? Mira glanced back at the painting she had been working on, raging waves under an ominous sky. Fitting. I have too, she said quietly. I want to know what they're planning. Sunday arrived like a funeral procession, gray skies, cold wind, and the oppressive weight of the unknown. Mira drove up the winding gravel road to Stormvale, the estate looming ahead like something out of a Gothic novel. Towering pines surrounded the stone mansion, their branches clawing at the overcast sky. She stepped out of her car, heels clicking on the rain-slicked pavement, and took a deep breath. The massive oak doors creaked open before she could knock. Eleanor Hawthorne stood in the foyer, as regal and austere as ever. Her platinum hair was sculpted into a severe bun, her face a flawless mask of indifference. Mira, she said with the warmth of a glacier. You're late. I'm 3 minutes early, Mira replied evenly. Without another word, Eleanor turned and walked deeper into the house. Mira followed, her footsteps echoing through the marble-floored corridor. The sitting room was fully occupied, Julian lounging near the fireplace, Aiden's younger sister Camille perched by the window, their Uncle Gerard and Aunt Helena whispering to each other with theatrical concern. At the center sat Cornelius Hawthorne, the family patriarch, in a high-backed chair like a throne. They were ranged in a semicircle. Like a tribunal. Mira's pulse quickened. She remained standing, crossing her arms as she scanned the room. What's going on? She asked sharply. Cornelius nodded to Julian, who reached beneath the table and pulled out a manila folder. He slid it across the polished mahogany table toward her. It's for the best, Eleanor said, her voice flat. Mira opened the folder. Divorce papers. The silence cracked like thunder. For a second, Mira genuinely thought it was a joke. She let out a dry laugh, looking up to see their expressionless faces. Except Camille, who smirked like a cat with a mouse cornered. You're not serious, Mira said slowly, closing the folder. Where's Aiden? He's not part of this, Cornelius replied. We're trying to spare him the emotional toll. Mira blinked. You're ambushing me with divorce papers, behind his back, and expect me to just comply? Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This isn't personal. You simply don't align with our legacy. You're not suited for what Aiden's meant to build. Legacy? Mira repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. What is this, Game of Thrones? Don't be dramatic, Eleanor said, as though Mira had spilled wine on an antique. Camille crossed her legs and shrugged. If you sign now, it'll be clean. We're giving you a chance to leave gracefully. The room buzzed with arrogance, certainty, and a total lack of empathy. Mira's hands curled into fists at her sides. For a moment, she felt like she couldn't breathe, like the walls of that grand old house were closing in on her. But then she remembered. She had come prepared. Mira reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder of her own, thicker, heavier, and marked with a red wax seal. She tossed it onto the table. I actually have something for you too. Julian's smile faltered. Cornelius arched a brow. Eleanor's lips twitched downward, ever so slightly. What is this? Cornelius asked, picking up the folder. Proof, Mira replied, her tone even but sharp as a blade. Of all the things you didn't want Aiden to know. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. What kind of proof? Mira leaned forward. Let's start with the unreported assets. The shell companies. The land sales under false names. Then we can move on to Camille's little real estate scam in Marbella. Camille paled. You're bluffing. Am I? Mira smiled sweetly. You should probably check page 13. The room descended into a suffocating silence. Mira could feel their confidence crumbling like the cliffs in her paintings, years of erosion, disguised until the final collapse. Right on cue, Aiden entered. He stepped into the room, drenched from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. Julian said there was some kind of family. He stopped short, eyes darting from Mira, to the folders, to his parents. What the hell is going on? Eleanor stood, too quickly. Aiden, darling, this isn't what it looks like. Mira cut in, never taking her eyes off Eleanor. Your family tried to get me to sign divorce papers behind your back. Aiden stared at the papers, speechless. But they weren't expecting me, Mira added, to have proof of everything they've been hiding from you. She pushed the folder toward him. His hands trembled as he picked it up. And as the truth began to unfold, piece by devastating piece, Mira stood tall in the storm of their unraveling. Aiden's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages in the folder Mira had given him. The sound of paper rustling echoed in the cavernous room, filling the silence like distant thunder. What is this? He asked, though his eyes were already reading the answer. Eleanor stepped toward him. Darling, whatever Mira has shown you. He cut her off without looking up. Is this real? Mira's voice was calm, but her body was tense, ready for the backlash. Every document, every transaction, every screenshot was vetted by a forensic accountant. Double-checked. I didn't come here with half-truths. You know me better than that. Cornelius leaned forward, nostrils flaring. You insolent. Don't, Mira warned, her tone like a warning bell. You've spoken enough for one day. Aiden turned the page again. This one showed a string of land acquisitions in his name, except he had never signed anything. Mira had cross-referenced the forged documents with a handwriting expert. Below that were scans of emails between Cornelius and a man named Blackwell, someone Aiden had never even heard of, discussing redirecting Aiden's holdings. He sat down heavily on one of the high-backed chairs, the folder resting on his knees like a brick. You took out loans in my name? Julian exhaled loudly, as if trying to defend himself. Technically, they were investments. The land would have flipped for triple the value if the market hadn't. You forged my signature, Aiden said quietly. You used my trust fund as collateral. Cornelius scoffed. We did what we had to do to protect the family legacy. If you had known, you'd have just gotten in the way. Unbelievable, Aiden muttered, burying his face in his hands. This whole time, I thought you were building something. And you were just training me. Mira approached slowly, kneeling in front of him. I wanted to tell you months ago. But I knew they'd twist the narrative if I didn't have undeniable proof. He looked at her, confused, heartbroken, ashamed. You've been carrying this alone? She nodded. Until I couldn't anymore. Camille rose from her spot near the window, face red with frustration. This is a circus. She's manipulating you. Mira turned to her, calm as ever. Are you sure you want to go down this road, Camille? Camille sneered. You think I'm scared of you? I think, Mira said slowly, pulling another folder from her bag, you're scared of what's in this. She laid it on the table and opened it like a magician revealing her final trick. Inside were transaction logs, money routed through dummy companies, false property management firms, and shell accounts linked to Camille. Each entry connected to large payments from Hawthorne accounts into her own consultancy firm in Spain. Cornelius's jaw tightened. Camille? Camille's bravado faltered. That's not what it looks like. Mira pointed at a highlighted line. And here's the lease for a luxury villa in Marbella, paid in full with funds siphoned from one of Aiden's dormant accounts. You thought labeling the payments as research grants would keep them hidden? Aiden's eyes narrowed. You used my name to buy vacation property? You never would have used that account anyway, Camille snapped. It was just sitting there. It was mine, he roared, standing suddenly. It was for my art residency fund. You knew that. Eleanor stepped forward, trying to regain control. This is getting out of hand. We can fix this. Quietly. Mira tilted her head. Quiet like how you tried to make me disappear with divorce papers? Aiden turned to his mother. Did you know about this? Eleanor hesitated, just a moment, but it was enough. She did, Mira said. She was on 3 of the emails. I have them printed and saved. Aiden looked like he was unraveling. You were all in on this. Cornelius stood, his voice booming. You have no idea what's at stake here. This family has operated for generations under one rule: preserve the estate, the name, and the bloodline. Mira's voice was razor sharp. Funny how preserve sounds a lot like steal when you're the one on the losing end. Julian stood too, tension mounting. So what now, Mira? You gonna sue us all? Take us to court? You want to ruin everything because your pride got bruised? Mira didn't flinch. You already ruined everything the moment you tried to erase me. Aiden looked at his brother. You ambushed my wife. You dragged our entire family into this farce without even telling me. She was going to ruin you, Julian snapped. No, Mira said, stepping between them. I saved him. You were the ones bleeding him dry. Silence. Aiden exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. He looked more tired than Mira had ever seen him. What do I do now? She handed him a pen. You sign the paperwork. Not the divorce, they tried to make that decision for you. My paperwork. This one gives you full control over your accounts again. Freezes all access under your name until a proper audit is done. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Don't you dare. Aiden stared at the pen, fingers hovering just above it. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he signed. 3 clean strokes across the document. The sound was deafening in the otherwise hushed room. That's it, Mira said softly. They don't control you anymore. Cornelius's face turned red. You'll regret this. Aiden looked up at him, eyes dark and unwavering. I already regret trusting you. The pen dropped onto the table. Mira turned to leave. But the unraveling had only just begun. For a moment, no one moved. The pen still lay on the table where Aiden had dropped it, the ink barely dry. Mira stood by the doorway, ready to leave, her shoulders stiff with anticipation. But the storm hadn't passed, not yet. The Hawthornes weren't going to let go of control without one final, desperate attempt to save face. Camille was the first to break the silence. This is all a setup, she hissed, stepping forward with a trembling finger pointed at Mira. She's manipulated everything, twisted the facts, and you're falling for it. Mira raised an eyebrow. Oh? Then explain these. She opened yet another folder she had tucked under her coat, thicker than the rest. She flipped it open and laid out documents across the coffee table, screenshots, wire transfers, anonymized whistleblower statements, and even private messages Camille had exchanged with a financial consultant. Aiden squinted at one sheet. Is this encrypted data from the Hawthorne Trust? Mira nodded. Camille authorized a breach in the trust's firewall to mask illicit transfers. She's been laundering money through her Spanish real estate ventures. Even forged invoices from fictitious vendors, just to funnel money into her personal offshore accounts. Camille turned a shade of gray. You hacked into? No, Mira interrupted, her tone ice cold. I didn't hack anything. Someone from your own staff came to me. Apparently, Camille wasn't quite as charming as she thought. He felt guilty watching you skim off money your brother had earned with no clue what was happening. Cornelius exploded from his seat. You mean to tell me this is true? Camille backed away, mouth open but voiceless. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the scattered papers from the table, only to drop them again. You idiot, Cornelius snapped. You could have ruined all of us. Camille glared at Mira, spitting venom. You think you've won? This isn't some movie where the outsider saves the day and walks away a hero. You'll be the one alone in the end. Maybe, Mira said quietly, but at least I'll be free. I won't be bound by your corruption, your lies, or your bloodline's obsession with power." Julian leapt to his feet next. "This is insane. We built this family name for generations, real estate, politics, finance, and you want to throw it away over one meddling woman?" Aiden stood too, slowly this time, and turned to Julian. "No. You threw it away the moment you forged my signature and stole from me. You all did. And the fact that you think Mira is the problem proves how blind you've become." Helena, who had been silently sipping tea in the corner until now, spoke up. "There's more," she said, her voice quiet but cutting. All eyes turned to her. "What?" Cornelius demanded. Helena's lips were tight, but her eyes, soft and sad, locked on her nephew. "Julian didn't just forge your signature. He took out a second line of credit against your future royalties. The trust was already declining in value. He made a bet you'd never know. He was planning to bail himself out before the market turned." Julian's head snapped toward her. "You promised." "I promised to keep your secret if no one got hurt," she said flatly. "But Mira was right. You tried to destroy her just to keep your crime from being exposed. You crossed a line." Cornelius roared, slamming his fist on the table. "I knew you weren't ready to lead this family." Julian snapped, "Maybe if you hadn't raised us like soldiers for your legacy, we wouldn't be here." The room erupted into chaos. Everyone was shouting, Cornelius berating Julian, Eleanor pleading for calm, Camille crying silently in the corner. Aiden stood motionless, his expression unreadable, as if the weight of a decade had just collapsed onto his chest. Mira watched it all unfold. The once pristine, perfectly controlled Hawthorne family now bickered like ordinary people, afraid, petty, and exposed. And she wasn't done yet. She cleared her throat, and surprisingly, everyone stopped. The silence felt heavier than before. "I didn't just come here for revenge," Mira said, her voice clear, unwavering. "I came here to end this." Cornelius scoffed. "You think exposing a few secrets will dismantle what we've built?" "Oh, I don't think," she said coolly. "I know." She placed one last folder on the table. Unlike the others, this one had only a single sheet inside. "An anonymous report," she said, "sent to the Federal Regulatory Commission, the Tax Authority, and a Financial Crimes Unit. Detailing every illegal transaction, every falsified document, every unethical business move linked to the Hawthorne name in the past 10 years. Cornelius's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "You're bluffing." "Check your inbox," she replied. Camille fumbled for her phone. Her face went pale. "They got it," she whispered. "There's a response. Already." Julian cursed under his breath. "You crazy bitch, do you have any idea what you've done? I've protected Aiden. And I've made sure no one else has to be manipulated by you again." Aiden turned to Mira, stunned. "You filed this already?" "I waited until I had everything," she said. "Until I knew that no matter what, the truth would survive, even if I didn't." Eleanor took a step toward Mira, for once not with cold disdain, but with trembling desperation. "Please. If this goes public, we lose everything." Mira's eyes locked with hers. "You should have thought of that before trying to destroy me." Aiden finally spoke, his voice gravelly and low. "You tried to make Mira the villain. All while stealing from me, lying to me, and hiding behind your reputation." He looked at each of them in turn. "You don't deserve this legacy. And I don't want any part of it anymore." Camille lunged toward Mira in a last-ditch effort, fury overtaking reason, but Julian caught her mid-motion. "Enough," he said, voice hollow. Mira turned to Aiden. "It's over." He nodded. Together, they walked out of Stormvale, the heavy doors creaking shut behind them like a final verdict. Inside, the Hawthornes were left to stew in silence. For the first time in generations, they weren't in control. And they knew it. The rain had stopped by the time Mira and Aiden reached the end of the long gravel drive that led away from Stormvale Estate. The sky above them had shifted from ashen gray to a pale amber, the kind of light that arrives just after a storm, gentle, fleeting, but filled with promise. Neither of them spoke at first. Aiden walked in silence, head bowed, hands stuffed deep in his coat pockets. Mira didn't press. She knew the silence wasn't about doubt, it was about reckoning. Everything he had believed about his family had just been torn away in a single afternoon. When they reached Myra's car, she turned to him. "You don't have to say anything right now." But Aiden did. "They raised me to think loyalty was everything," he said, his voice low. "That the name, the estate, the business, those were the pillars of our legacy. But loyalty only works when it's mutual." Mira nodded. "You were loyal to an illusion." He looked at her, and there was pain in his eyes, but also clarity. "And I almost let them destroy you to protect it. You didn't know." "I should have," he whispered. "You were the only one who ever told me the truth. And I didn't listen soon enough." She placed a hand on his. "You listened when it mattered." Aiden didn't follow her home that night. He drove to a hotel across town, away from the Hawthornes, away from the estate, away from the legacy. It was the first time he had ever checked into a place under his own name without any prepaid arrangements made by his family. A strange but freeing feeling. Within 48 hours, the consequences of Myra's actions began to ripple through the world of the Hawthornes like a tsunami. The first blow landed when the Federal Regulatory Commission froze 3 of the Hawthorne Trust's primary investment accounts. A detailed investigation had begun, quietly at first, then rapidly escalating. Mira had submitted more than just the family's criminal behavior. She included a clear trail of misappropriated funds, shell companies used to dodge taxes, and internal communications that exposed decades of financial manipulation. Cornelius tried to spin the situation. He hired a crisis PR team, paid off a few old contacts in high places, but the evidence was too overwhelming, too well organized. The second blow came from within. Aiden hired an independent auditor to review all his personal accounts, holdings, and contracts. What they found confirmed Myra's earlier warnings. At least 40% of his personal wealth had been illegally leveraged or drained by his own family under forged or coercive agreements. And he pressed charges. The headlines hit national news within days. Heir to Hawthorne empire sues family over embezzlement and fraud. Golden family of Eastchester faces collapse amid scandal. Mira watched the news from her apartment, sipping tea, her phone buzzing with updates and questions from journalists. She didn't respond to any of them. She wasn't looking for fame. Just justice. Camille was arrested 2 weeks later. The audit team found at least 6 instances of falsified vendor accounts created in Spain and Belize, with wire transfers linked directly to her signature. Her lawyer tried to claim ignorance, but the digital fingerprints were undeniable. Julian's turn came next. The illegal leveraging of Aiden's name and intellectual property led to charges of identity theft and misrepresentation. His fall from grace was perhaps the most public. He had been groomed to take over the Hawthorne Foundation, and within days, he was stripped of all board positions and titles. But perhaps the hardest blow came to Cornelius. After decades of running the empire, the patriarch was finally revealed not as a builder, but as a saboteur. His methods, once lauded as visionary, were reclassified as fraudulent. He was served a subpoena while dining at his private club, a moment that made its way onto the evening news. Eleanor, who had always kept her hands clean on paper, faded into reclusive silence. Her Ladies of Legacy Club revoked her honorary status. Sponsors pulled out of her charity board. The very high society she had once ruled over now saw her as toxic. Stormvale Estate, centuries old, inherited by blood and guarded like a fortress, was seized by the bank less than a month later. Mira saw a photo online, the gates chained, the windows dark, the infamous lion statues standing alone in the garden like forgotten ghosts. Aiden never tried to reclaim Stormvale. Instead, he redirected the legal damages he won from the family suit into something new, an arts foundation, independent of the Hawthorne name. He named it the Mira Fund, a tribute she hadn't expected, and one she initially tried to refuse. "I didn't do this to be honored," she told him. "I know," he replied. "But you saved me. And I want to make sure your bravery keeps helping people, even people you'll never meet." Their divorce went through smoothly. Mira had made her decision early on. She wasn't interested in patching things together out of trauma. They had both been complicit in enabling the family's shadow for too long, Aiden through silence, Mira through endurance. But they parted with respect. No bitterness. Just understanding. "You didn't fail me," Mira said during the final court appearance. "You freed yourself. I should have fought sooner," he replied. "You did when it counted." The fallout from the Hawthorne collapse rippled across the country. Investors pulled out of old partnerships. Foundations once linked to their name scrambled to rebrand. Lawsuits popped up from former employees, competitors, even former allies now desperate to distance themselves. But Mira didn't watch it all with malice. She watched it with closure. Revenge had never been her end goal. Freedom was. She moved across the country to a coastal town where no one knew her name. Opened her own gallery. Started fresh. She painted again, vivid colors, angry skies, crashing waves. But slowly, the storms began to clear in her art, replaced by soft sunrises and warm beaches. Her work sold quickly, and soon, she was being interviewed not as the woman who took down a dynasty, but as an emerging talent in her own right. Sometimes people asked about her past. She never gave details. Just smiled and said, "I used to be married into a legacy. But now, I build my own." The air in Mirabelle's new life was different, lighter, unburdened, like every breath she took no longer belonged to someone else's story. It had been nearly a year since she left Stormvale behind. Her coastal town, nestled between cliffs and the sea, was the kind of place where mornings smelled like salt and fresh bread, and evenings hummed with the sound of tide and laughter. Here, she wasn't the disgraced daughter-in-law of a crumbling empire. She was just Mira, the artist with sea-stained fingers and fire in her brush strokes. Her gallery, the Tidal Room, had become a quiet sensation. Locals came for the ocean-inspired paintings, collectors came for the story behind the silence. Mira never told them the whole truth. She didn't need to. Her art did that for her. Back in the city, the final threads of the Hawthorne family legacy were unraveling. Stormvale Estate had been auctioned off to an international development group who had plans to turn it into a luxury retreat. Most of the old fixtures, marble staircases, heirloom chandeliers, antique portraits, had been stripped out and sold to cover back taxes. Cornelius, once feared in corporate boardrooms, now lived in a modest rented house on the outskirts of Eastchester. Rumor had it he'd lost most of his private savings to legal fees and restitution payments. The press hounded him for a while, but as newer scandals surfaced, his became just another archive disgrace. Eleanor all but vanished from public life. She no longer hosted charity balls or brunches with senators' wives. The last time she was seen was at a quiet bookstore, wearing sunglasses and a scarf despite the weather. She passed a copy of The Art of Letting Go across the counter without a word. Camille, after months of public trials and failed apologies, served a 6-month sentence in a minimum security facility. When she got out, she tried to re-enter the social scene, one last desperate grasp at her old identity, but no one returned her calls. Word was she was working in a small real estate office under a different name. Julian had fled to South America before the indictment stuck. He posted a few cryptic photos on social media, beaches, motorbikes, dark-lit bars, but no one really cared anymore. His influence had evaporated the moment the Hawthorne name lost its currency. And Aiden? He visited Mira once. It was early spring when he arrived, no warning, no fanfare. She found him standing in the gallery just after closing, staring at one of her newer pieces, a cracked lighthouse, still glowing through a midnight storm. "You always liked lighthouses," he said softly. She nodded. "They remind me that even in chaos, someone's still trying to find their way." They talked for over an hour. Not about the past, not directly. They both know what had happened didn't need to be rehashed. Instead, they spoke of beginnings. He told her about the Arts Foundation, how the Mira Fund had just awarded its 5th grant to an underprivileged sculptor in Detroit. He told her he no longer used the Hawthorne name. Just Hayden Rivers now. She told him about the gallery, the community mural project she had started with the local school, and how she'd recently been invited to showcase her work in Italy. They sat outside on a driftwood bench facing the sea. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," he said eventually. Mira looked at him, eyes soft. "I know. I just needed to see you thriving," he said. "To know that everything you gave up wasn't for nothing." She reached over, gently touching his hand. "You found yourself, Aiden. That's all I ever wanted." He didn't cry, but his eyes glistened, and she let him have that moment. They said goodbye without promises or regrets. Just peace. As the months passed, Mira's life bloomed in ways she hadn't expected. She was invited to speak on panels about artistic freedom and financial empowerment. Not because of her past, but because of her resilience. Her insight. She was contacted by women across the country, some anonymous, some public, thanking her for showing what survival looked like. For proving that you could walk through fire and come out whole. That leaving didn't make you weak. That staying silent was never the only option. And so Mira began to write. Not a memoir. But a story. Fictional, but rooted in truth. It followed a woman named Elise, married into a dynasty, blindsided by betrayal, and reborn in a coastal village where the tide knew all her secrets and loved her anyway. When the book came out, it wasn't a bestseller. But it didn't have to be. It found the people who needed it. And that was enough. Years later, Mira stood alone on the cliffside just beyond her gallery, a canvas propped before her, wind tugging at her hair. Below, the ocean raged like it always had, beautiful and merciless, familiar and wild. She dipped her brush into deep cobalt and swept it across the canvas. Each stroke was hers now. No one controlled her hands. No one controlled her future. The name Hawthorne had faded from headlines. The estate was now a high-end retreat, ironically named Sanctuary at Stormvale. Mira found it funny. She'd once been told she didn't belong there, and now, no one from the original family did. Justice had been served. But what Mira had found was something greater. Liberation. A life not defined by revenge, but by reinvention. A future that was hers to create. If there was one thing Mira knew for certain now, it was this. You can't choose the family you're born into, or even the one you marry into. But you can choose to walk away when that family chooses control over compassion. When they mistake love for leverage. When their legacy demands your silence. Mira hadn't just broken free. She had rewritten the ending. And in doing so, she gave others permission to do the same.